So we've been learning the components to solving equations and be using bags and coins as a way to represent the equations, make it a little more concrete. But at the same time, we have to realize that bags and coins don't really represent reality. You would just open the bags, so it's really not that complicated. Equations are going to be used for all sorts of things, and not everything in life is going to be positive, right? Some things are going to be negative numbers. It's possible to have fractions and decimals as your answers. We don't have to always get a whole number. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at how subtraction and positives and negatives affect our equation solving steps, but how you can really keep using the same steps. And if you trust the process, then you shouldn't have a problem. So let's look at this. Let's look at these two equations here on page 9 of your packet. It says, how do these two equations compare? And what I hope that you notice about them is both of them have the same numbers in them. They both have 2x, they have a 10, and they have 16. So then they're the same, but not really, because in the first equation, you're adding 10. You're adding 10 to 2x in order to get up to 16. But in the other equation, you're doing 2 times the number, then you're subtracting 10, and the result is 16. So x cannot be the same number in both of these equations. We should be getting different answers. The issue we're going to have with subtraction is that subtraction is always going to involve, we don't really subtract, is what I'm trying to say. Really, we add negatives. And so you have two options here. If you were able to see that 2x minus 10 is the same thing as having a 2x and a negative 10, then you're good. And that's where we want you to be. And then you shouldn't have really a lot of issues here. But if that doesn't make any sense to you, if I'm telling you that's negative 10 and it's minus 10 at the same time, and you don't get that, then what you might want to do is do what we did before and change subtract to add and the second number to its opposite. So let me show you what I mean. This first equation on the left, as we solve them, it's going to be pretty easy. I'm going to draw this line down to break it on the equal sign to break it up into two sides. We noticed that we had repetitive steps when we had two-step equations. Our two steps are subtract, then divide, right? Subtract, then divide. Okay, so let's try that. So I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides to get my bags by themselves, right? And just get rid of the coins. So 10 minus 10 is 0. That's gone. And I just have 2x left over here. And on the right, I have 16. Take away 10 is 6. So I should have 2x equals 6 when I take 10 away from both sides. My next step is always divide. So now I'm going to divide both sides by the coefficient of x. So I divide by 2 because there's two bags. So I divide by 2, divide by 2. That means x, 2 divided by 2 is 1. It's the invisible 1. X equals 6 divided by 2, which is 3. So x should equal 3. And I could just quickly check that. When you do the check, you do the RSS method, rewrite the equation, substitute in your answer, rewriting everything exactly as it was, just exchanging the variable for the answer, and then you solve. So 2 times 3 is 6, plus 10 is 16. So yes, indeed, 16 does equal 16, so it checks. Great. Let's try the one on the right. Now on the right, I can't subtract 10 from both sides because I don't actually have 10 coins. I'm taking away 10 coins. Let me rewrite this so you can understand a little differently. So I have 2x, keep, change subtract to add, change 10 to its opposite. So to negative 10. So now you can see I have two bags and what? Negative 10 coins? Like I'm in debt 10 coins, kind of. So I can't subtract something I don't have away from both sides. So instead, I'm going to do the opposite. What is the opposite of negative 10. It's a positive 10. So I'm going to give a positive 10 to both sides. If you are just dead set on subtraction, you're like, no, my first step is always subtraction. Then what you would be subtracting is, you would be subtracting a subtract, and you would subtract a negative 10. So I have to subtract negative 10 from both sides. But remember, subtracting, keep, change subtract to add, change the second number to its opposite. Subtracting a negative is adding. So really I'm adding 10 to both sides. Negative 10 and positive 10 is 0. It's gone. So I'm just left with 2x on the left. And on the right, I have 16 plus 10 this time, not subtract. I'm adding 10, and I get 26. So now I'm going to, again, I divide by the coefficient, divide by 2, and I get x equals 13. And that makes sense because in order for me to have something and then take away 10 and still be left with 16, I must have had more to start with than I did over here. So I can check it though. Every time I check it, I'm going to rewrite it the way it was originally before I changed it in any way. So I went back to the very beginning and then I substitute in my answer. I think it is 13. And then I solve. So 2 times 13 is 26. 26 minus 10 is 16. And so yes, 16 does equal 16, and it checks. So what you should notice is when I was adding 10 to both 10 to the variable, when I have 2x plus 10, my first step was subtract, just like it was with all the bags and coins. But now, when I have 2x minus 10, my first step is to add. I'm doing the opposite. So to solve, we always do the opposite. That's why we divide as the last step, right? Because it says 2 times x. So we have to divide, which is the opposite, in order to solve. Let's look at these 3 examples here. So in these 3 examples, they're showing you, again, these all look similar because they have the same numbers in them and they have an x in them. The only difference is the negatives placement. So here we have 3 times x equals 15, then negative 3 times x equals 15. 3 times x equals negative 15. Negative 3 times x equals negative 15. So they're all different possibilities. So what the key is, like this first one should be easy. I'm multiplying a number times x to get 15. The opposite of multiply is divide. Think about it. Every time when you're solving that last step and you add like the number of bags and you divide it by the number of bags, that's what we're doing. We're going to divide by the number in front of the x. So I divide both sides by 3 and I get x equals 5. Let me do the one below it. Now I have 3 times x equals negative 15. Well, again, I'm going to divide by the number that x is being multiplied by. I'm dividing by the coefficient. 3 divided by 3 is the invisible 1x. And on the right, negative 15 divided by 3. Now, when you do a negative divided by a positive, your answer is negative. So that's negative 5. So it's the same value, but it's a different sign because the 15 was negative this time. So now what's going to happen over here, this one now it gets a little more tricky because people get stuck. So I have negative 3 times x. Well, I don't want you to get too confused. Here's what you're going to do. You're just going to divide by the number that is in front of the x. And the number in front of the x this time is a negative 3. So that's what I'm going to divide by. I'm going to divide by negative 3 because negative 3 divided by negative 3 is the invisible 1. If I only divide by 3 and I divide a negative by a positive, I have a negative x. I don't want negative x. I just want x. So now I have x equals, I have to divide the other side by negative 3 because the number I'm dividing by on both sides should be identical, the exact same number and the exact same sign. So 15 divided by negative 3 is negative 5. Notice again how here, these ones in the diagonal have the same solution because only one thing was negative. Now let's see what happens over here. Now we're going to solve this last one. Negative 3 times x equals negative 15. So I'm going to divide, because the opposite of multiplication is division. I divide by the number that's in front of the variable. I divide by the coefficient. So now I'm dividing negative 3 divided by negative 3 is the invisible 1x. Negative 15 divided by a negative 3, a negative divided by a negative is positive. Remember, when they're both negative, your answer is positive. This is positive 5. So now these diagonals are the same solution. There you go. Now you can take it or leave it. If things are clicking for you, that's great. But if you're just like, all I'm at is I know I divide, and whatever answer I get in the calculator, I'm good. Well, then that's fine for now. Okay. Now we're going to have steps to solving, but let's just go over just the most basic steps we have so far. Okay, because just two-step equations, not when it gets harder. Let's just do the two-step. The first thing we're going to do is add. Let me get my pen. Hold on. We are either going to add or subtract the constant. We're going to do the opposite. So what that means is there's a place for you to write this on page 9. That means, like in this equation, the constant here is 10. It's being added. So I'm going to do the opposite of add. I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides. Our second step, at that point, we should have just the variable with the coefficient in front of it on one side, and we should have a constant on the other side of the equal sign. So you have bags on one side and coins on the other. So what we're going to do is we are going to divide by the coefficient. Now I'm going to say what the coefficient is here in a minute, and you're going to see why I write coefficient instead. You're like, oh, what's a coefficient? You should know what a coefficient is, but anyway. What I could say is divide by the number that's being multiplied by the letter, or divide by the number that's in front of the x. Like, I could say it that way, but by saying the coefficient, I just said all of that in one word. So the coefficient is the number in front of the variable. It's the number that's being multiplied by the variable. You need to start using the word coefficient, because it's going to be a word you're going to use through every math class you have for the rest of the time that you have math. Okay, so those are our most basic two-step equations. After you do that, you should always check your answer using RSS, because the great thing about equation solving is you don't need an answer key. I mean, you can have an answer key to check it, but you don't need one. All you need to do is use RSS, rewrite, substitute, and solve, and check your own answers. And if it's checking, then you can be confident about what you're doing, and you don't have to worry about whether or not you're right. So from there, the first couple equations on page 10 are pretty straightforward, and then they get more and more challenging as you go, and we can get pretty tough here in 7th grade math, but hopefully you get the basics. Thanks for watching.